The first crack in the night came when my mother tapped her glass, that brittle sound she always used when she wanted the room to admire Barbara. Her wedding was beautiful, she announced, smiling wide enough to stretch the lie. So, Susan, when's yours? A few guests chuckled. My father kept carving the turkey like it was a matter of national security. And Barbara, she just watched me, those two careful eyes that always pretended not to see the wounds she helped create. I set my fork down. I already had mine, I said. You got the invitations. The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was a blade, the kind meant for punishment, for retribution, for slicing the last thread holding a family together. My father exhaled, barely audible. We never got them. His voice trembled, but not with guilt, with fear, because he knew what came next. I reached into my bag, and that was the moment when years of their tidy stories, their curated perfection, their betrayal, finally cracked open like an old wound they had tried to plaster over. Growing up, my family worshipped symmetry. Perfect photos, perfect milestones, perfect narratives to parade before strangers. In all of them, Barbara stood at the centre, radiant, choreographed, mother approved. I wasn't angry then. I thought that was how families worked. One child shines, the other steps aside. But by adolescence, it wasn't a pattern. It was doctrine. And I learned its commandments. My mother shaped Barbara's life like an exhibition, dance trophies, cheer squads, framed certificates glowing beneath hallway lights. Whenever it was my turn, the science fair win, the college acceptance, Mum would glance at the clock, at the lighting, at Barbara's latest headshot waiting to be photographed. Later, Susan, she'd say with that clipped smile, we need good light. So I adapted. I dissolved. I learned to survive quietly, to swallow resentment until it hardened into something colder than grief, something like personal justice waiting for its moment. Leaving for work 3 hours away in the city of Northbridge wasn't rebellion. It was oxygen. My tiny apartment with tall windows and Richard's coffee scent woven into everything felt like a life I chose, not one assigned to me. My job, analysing water systems and environmental data, didn't impress the people my mother tried to impress, but it mattered. It grounded me. And Richard, he saw me. Not as a shadow orbiting Barbara, but as a person worth remembering. His parents, Kimberly and Kevin, didn't hug me like a formality. They held me. Present, steady, real. So when Richard proposed on that fog-streaked June morning by the water, I said yes without a flicker of doubt. We chose a small chapel on the coast, invited only the people who knew us, kept everything stripped of performance and suffocating expectations. The one thing I wanted, unreasonably, stubbornly, was for my parents and Barbara to come. Just once, to choose me. I designed the invitations myself, mailed them early with signature required, because I knew my family's habit of misplacing anything that didn't elevate Barbara's spotlight. I checked the addresses again and again. I refreshed the tracking numbers like a ritual. When the delivery confirmations appeared, I finally breathed. Then came the silence. No call, no text, not even a passing, empty congrats in the family chat. Weeks passed. The wedding passed. Still nothing. I invented excuses to slow the rising suspicion. Maybe the mail got mixed up. Maybe they were planning something. Maybe they were waiting. But beneath the excuses, a colder truth whispered. Someone didn't want those invitations reaching them. Someone had decided my happiness didn't deserve witnesses, and I had no idea how right I was until that Thanksgiving. The silence after the wedding didn't just linger. It spread, creeping into everything like a slow leak, seeping from an old pipe, corrosive and patient. At first, I waited. They're busy, I told myself. They'll call. They'll at least ask why they weren't invited. But days bled into weeks, and the quiet grew heavier, deliberate, an open wound that refused to close. I reached out. Once, twice, too many times. My mother's phone went straight to voicemail. My father sent a polite, "I'll call later," a promise that dissolved like all the others. And sitting there at the table, their eyes flickering, their forks frozen midair, I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal. And betrayal always demands its reckoning. The first real fracture wasn't loud. It was the absence of something. My name missing from the family group chat we'd had since college. Not removed, erased. Quietly, surgically, the way you excise something you've already decided is irrelevant. I mentioned it to Richard while we stood at the sink, hands wet, steam rising between us. Maybe it's a glitch, I said, but my voice wavered, betraying the lie. He dried his hands slowly, watching me with that quiet intuition that always cut deeper than questions. Susan, did they ever respond to the invitations? At all? I shook my head. Not even once. He didn't accuse, didn't push for details. He simply said, "Then, let's check the logs." With his help, I clicked through folders and settings I never knew existed. And then, the truth surfaced, cold and undeniable. The access log for the family email. One of my invitation notices opened, deleted, permanently erased. The timestamp glared at me like a verdict. Not a glitch, not forgetfulness, not an oversight, a choice, a punishment. A quiet act of betrayal carried out with deliberate, meticulous cruelty. And the worst part? I didn't need to guess who had done it. I could see Barbara in my mind, standing in the soft yellow light of our childhood kitchen, flipping through envelopes as if they were props in her never-ending performance. She'd always been the gatekeeper, the family's self-appointed filter. Mum's schedules, Dad's bills, incoming calls, all of it passed through her hands. She curated what they saw, what they didn't, what was allowed to matter. So, my wedding, my happiness, my quiet life that didn't orbit her spotlight? Of course she'd intercept that. It fit her pattern too perfectly. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces locked into place with a sickening clarity. Barbara was planning her grand September spectacle, 350 guests, designer everything, a celebration built like a shrine to herself. My small, coastal ceremony, even in its simplicity, carried the danger of attention. And Barbara never tolerated competition, especially not from me. But suspicion wasn't enough. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that would end their decades-long narrative of my supposed misunderstanding. So I pulled up the tracking receipts I had saved. 4 packages, 4 signatures required, my name glowing as sender, their address below it, and the signature at the bottom of one receipt. A curl of handwriting I recognized instantly. Barbara's. My throat tightened. That familiar burn, resentment, pent-up rage, an old wound torn open again, rose like a tide. She hadn't misplaced anything. She hadn't forgotten. She had orchestrated my absence. She'd ensured no one saw my wedding at all. Richard touched my arm gently. "Susan, what do you want to do?" I didn't answer. Revenge would have been the easy thought. Rage would have made sense. But what I felt was deeper. A slow boiling hatred mixed with grief, the kind only bred by years of being unseen. What do you do when the people you love choose to erase you? Thanksgiving was approaching. I considered skipping it, letting them maintain the fiction that I simply wasn't part of their lives anymore. But pretending was how this whole structure of betrayal had been built. I wasn't going to reinforce it. So, I went, and I carried the truth with me like a blade wrapped in silk. Thanksgiving always seemed immaculate from the outside, white tablecloth, polished silver, candles flickering like a staged tableau meant for some holiday catalogue. But the moment I stepped over the threshold, the old tension wrapped around me, a familiar weight, like slipping into a coat you never wanted, but somehow still fits. Barbara stood by the fireplace, posing while her husband angled her hair just so, as if they were printing next year's Christmas card. My mother drifted around the kitchen, narrating Barbara's September wedding to anyone within reach, spinning the story like a publicist desperate for applause. My father poured wine with the hollow efficiency of someone already exhausted. Not one person asked how I was. Not one mentioned the wedding they all pretended never happened. I took my seat across from Barbara. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Silence in her hands had always been a performance, a weapon polished to perfection. Dinner followed its predictable script. Praise for her gown, her venue, her guest list, her network. Every sentence felt like another reminder. They had chosen her over and over without hesitation. And then, the tap of a glass. Sister's wedding was wonderful, my mother announced brightly, glowing at Barbara. Then her smile sharpened. So, Susan, when's yours? The table chuckled on cue, and the retribution waiting inside me finally stirred. Even the turkey knife in my father's hand hesitated, suspended mid-air as if unsure which side of the truth it wanted to align with. Across the table, Barbara kept her gaze pinned to her plate, too still, too composed, too rehearsed. That stillness told me everything. For years I would have swallowed the jab, let it sink under my skin and pretend the sting wasn't real. But not tonight. Not with the weight of everything they'd buried pressing against my ribs like a bruise that never healed. I set my fork down with deliberate calm. I already had mine, I said. 6 months ago. The shift in the room was instantaneous, like someone had cracked open a vacuum and drained all the air at once. I let the silence stretch, let it wrap every person at the table in its tightening grip. You got invitations, I added softly. Forks froze mid-motion. My mother's smile collapsed in on itself like wet paper. My father blinked fast, as if hoping his eyes had misheard. And Barbara, the still statue, didn't flinch, didn't breathe. That was her tell. She knew exactly where this was headed, and she was powerless to stop the inevitable retribution creeping toward her. Susan, my father began carefully, we never got any invitations. The lie slid out smooth, familiar, a reflex, a shield they'd used my entire life. Once I might have accepted it. Now it only sharpened my clarity. I figured you'd say that, I murmured. I reached into my bag without theatrics, without haste. I placed my phone on the table. Its glow caught the candlelight, reflecting in the wine glasses, cutting through the room like a thin blade of judgment. Every pair of eyes locked onto it. They knew, even before I touched the screen, that something was coming, something final. I tapped the screen. The storm went quiet, not chaotic, not loud. Quiet in the way the sea stills right before it drowns a coastline. 4 deliveries, 4 signatures, all marked received. I rotated the phone so the table could see. The looping, confident handwriting at the bottom of the first receipt hit like a verdict. Barbara, my mother gasped, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. My father leaned forward as if proximity could rewrite what he was seeing. George stiffened, eyes flicking from the screen to his wife as if discovering a stranger at his table. Barbara didn't move, didn't blink. She'd always been good at silence, but now it exposed her rather than protecting her. These were delivered April 23rd, I said evenly, all 4 signed for by Barbara. Dead silence, but this time it wasn't shock, it was exposure, naked, undeniable, merciless. My father whispered, This must be a mistake. It's not, I replied, sliding to the next screenshot. Here's the tracking log. Priority mail, signature required, all confirmed, all delivered. I paused, let the truth settle. And all intercepted. My mother shook her head, fragile denial spilling out. No, that makes no sense. Barbara would never... Oh, stop, I said gently. Not cruel, just done. Done being erased, done being rewritten. You keep insisting what Barbara wouldn't do, but you never look at what she actually does. That landed like a stone thrown into glass. George finally spoke, voice low and tight. Barbara, did you sign for these? Barbara blinked, not thoughtfully but mechanically, as if scrambling to reboot a shattered expression. I don't remember. Sometimes I grabbed the mail, but I didn't see any invitations. I stayed quiet. Silence, after all, can be its own form of retribution. and she felt it. My father's voice hardened. You didn't see 4 packages from your sister around the time you knew she was engaged? It's not my job to track everyone's mail, Barbara snapped, the first fracture in her perfect porcelain composure. It was sharp enough to cut the room in half, and a disastrous move. My mother reached toward her. Sweetheart. No, I said. My voice stayed calm, unsettlingly so. Let her talk. She's been talking for years. Barbara shot me a glare, pure, boiling hatred leaking through the cracks. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. Instead, I swiped to the final screenshot, the email activity log. This, I said quietly, is the access log for the family email account. The screen glowed between us like an exposed nerve. The wedding announcement I sent was opened from this house, I continued, and then deleted immediately. My father's jaw tightened until the muscles trembled. Who, he said slowly, like the word was painful to speak, has access to that account? Everyone at that table already knew the answer. They'd known for years, even if none of them dared to say it aloud. Barbara was the first to crack. I didn't delete anything, she blurted, too quick, too brittle. I tilted my head, studying her the way you examine something that has finally stopped pretending. Then, why is your device ID stamped on the deletion log? Her mouth opened, closed, fluttered again, like a failing engine trying to restart. I must have clicked the wrong thing. You're blowing this out of proportion. Why are you coming after me? I'm not coming after you, I said quietly. I'm holding up the mirror. My mother let out a sharp, frustrated breath. Why would Barbara ever hide your invitations? Why would she sabotage your wedding? That's absurd. There it was, the same rehearsed defense she had polished since we were children, her favourite shield for every bruise Barbara ever carved into me. Why? I repeated. Because my wedding happened in June. My eyes shifted to Barbara. And yours was set for September. Barbara recoiled, the truth striking her with the precision of a blade she thought she'd hidden well. That's delusional, she spat. You twist everything so it makes me look like the villain. No, I said, my voice flat and steady. That's a role you wrote for yourself. George's chair scraped across the hardwood as he shot to his feet. Barbara, is this actually true? She stared at her napkin as if it might offer an escape route. Her breath trembled. I don't know. Everyone always sees Susan as this innocent saint. She never needs anything, never complains, never ruins anything for anyone. She just stands there and makes people feel... I spoke softly. Makes them feel what? Barbara jolted upright, her voice cracking. Feel guilty, feel inadequate, feel like she doesn't have to try at all. There it was, the actual confession, not about envelopes, about years, decades, the resentment she'd nurtured like a private fire. So, that's why you hid my wedding? I asked. Because it didn't compete with your custom gown and orchestral show? Because my quiet happiness threatened your spotlight? That's not... Her voice caught, but the truth was already spreading through the room like smoke in a sealed space. Susan, my father said, desperate, we didn't know. If we'd known, we absolutely would have come, I finished, after forgetting every birthday, after dismissing every achievement, after decades of bending the world around Barbara's wants. He shut his eyes as if the truth was a light he couldn't face. My mother's expression twisted defensively. You can't blame us for everything. We tried. You tried for Barbara, I said calmly. For me, you scraped together the leftovers and called it fairness. Barbara collapsed back into her chair, her posture folding like a structure finally buckling under its own weight. Even she couldn't resurrect the lie anymore. For the first time in years, something inside me aligned. Not grief, clarity, an ending that had waited to happen. I didn't lose my family tonight, I said. I stopped pretending I still had one. My mother's breath caught. Susan, don't say that. Don't talk like that. Why? I asked. Because it shatters the narrative you prefer, the one where Barbara is untouchable, Dad is the silent mediator, you are the hero. And I am the problem. We never said you were the problem, my father whispered. You never had to say it, I answered. You lived it. George sank back down, looking at Barbara as if seeing her for the first time, as if realizing the architecture of their life was built on a fault line. Barbara whispered, barely audible, Susan, please. That word, please, carried every ounce of fear she'd never shown, every flicker of guilt she'd buried, and the sudden awareness that the control she'd always counted on was slipping. I rose, the legs of my chair scraping softly against the floorboards. I'm done asking for a place here. I'm done pretending your silence doesn't wound. I'm done minimizing what Barbara has done and what the rest of you allowed. A breath. I'm done. My father stood too, reaching out like he could pull back time. Susan, don't leave. Let's talk this through. We are talking, I said, for the first time and the last time under these rules. My mother's voice broke. We can fix this. You can't repair something you refuse to admit exists, I replied, and denial has been your foundation for years. I took my coat, sliding it over my shoulders, feeling something inside me uncoil for the first time in my life. Behind me, I heard Barbara's quiet sobs. My mother whispered my name like someone praying too late. My father's voice cracked. We should have asked, we should have checked. But their regret belonged to them, not to me. I opened the door. A burst of cold air swept in, clean and honest. I paused just long enough to say, You didn't miss my wedding. You chose not to see it. Then I stepped out, letting the door shut behind me like the closing of a long unfinished chapter of retribution. I stepped outside and let the door fall shut behind me. Not with a slam, not with theatrics, just a firm, deliberate click, a clean border drawn. For the first time in my life, the silence on the other side of that threshold belonged to me. Richard opened our front door before I even reached the porch, as if he'd been listening for the rhythm of my footsteps. One glance at my face, and he didn't ask a single question. He simply folded me into his arms, steady and warm, holding me until the tremor in my chest loosened. No interrogation, no disappointment, just presence, the kind my family had never learned to give. The next morning, his parents invited us over for breakfast. Nothing ceremonious, nothing drenched in pity, just scrambled eggs, soft toast, gentle voices, and the kind of attention that doesn't need to be earned. Kimberly squeezed my fingers and said, Your family here, not because you married Richard, because you matter. It landed in a place inside me that had been starved for years. A week later, Barbara sent a long, sprawling email. Half apology, half therapeutic revelation. Soft edges, admissions I never expected to see written in her voice. I read every word, and then I closed it. I didn't respond. Some wounds don't need revisiting, some don't deserve reopening. My father started calling, carefully, tentatively, every few days. Little steps, small repairs attempted in slow, quiet ways. I didn't shut him out. I let him try. Then, one afternoon, he found one of my wedding invitations tucked in a dusty storage box in the garage, still sealed, confirmation of everything I'd already uncovered. He mailed it to me without commentary, without excuses. Just the envelope and silence. It was the closest he had ever come to a real apology. My mother never reached out. Not a call, not a message, not even a brittle, defensive explanation. And for the first time in my life, her absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like clarity, a long overdue truth finally revealing its shape. I used to believe family was something you protected at all costs, even when it demanded pieces of yourself. But standing now in the glow of my own kitchen, listening to Richard chopping vegetables, laughter drifting from friends arriving for dinner, people who choose me without hesitation, I finally understood something simple and sharp. Family isn't blood. It's presence. It's consistency. It's the ones who stay when everything else shatters. And sometimes, the most courageous act of personal justice is walking away from those who never learned how to hold you without conditions. If any part of this story echoes something in your own life, tell me where you're watching from and share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter.